Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on another cloudy day here in the capital as once again we ensure we have a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership. My name is Scott Challoner and I'm delighted to be joined on the programme today by Richard Brown. Richard is the Chief Executive of Listening Ear and Amparo. Listening Ear Merseyside provides an acclaimed counselling service for children, young people and adults affected by bereavement, while Amparo supports those bereaved by suicide. Richard, very warm welcome to you and thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us on today's programme.
No problem, it's great to be here.
It's a real pleasure having you with us, Richard. The purpose of this discussion, first and foremost, is to establish your take on leadership. So if we dive straight in by taking that word leader aside for a moment and exploring it in a little bit more depth, I'm interested to know what that word means to you and what you feel a leader should be.
Leadership's a really interesting feature of the work people do and how they engage, particularly in the workplace. One of the things for me that is important around leadership is having to do the jobs that need doing. Sometimes you look at a problem or an issue and you think, I really don't want to deal with that. But true leadership says, I don't want to deal with it, but it needs to be done. It's important. So we've got to pick it up. And no matter how painful it is to do, you have to do it. And I know that sounds like a negative form of leadership, but for me, I think it's a really important element of it because it demonstrates that no matter what is coming at you in the workplace, you're prepared to deal with that problem and think about it in a rational way and ensure that the solution that you come to is the correct solution and that you can then implement what needs to be done. For me, that, like I say, that's a really important part of leadership. And it demonstrates particularly to the people who work for you, that you will do things and you will get things done in a way that you're not affected by it, negative opinions or personal preference. It's about doing the right thing at the right time.
It's about taking ownership and responsibility of situations, isn't it? Even if, of course, whatever may be going right or wrong isn't necessarily completely down to you. But as a leader, the buck does stop with you and you have to assume that responsibility. And I think it is fair to say that leaders themselves have had to really step up to the plate over the last few months as we've got to grips with the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that we've had to chart a course through this uncharted territory. Tell me, Richard, for yourselves, how has it been attempting to navigate the last few weeks and months? Because obviously mental health and well-being has really been at the forefront of our minds during this entire period.
It's been a challenging period. I won't deny it. We started planning for this really in early March. We had a business continuity plan like every other organisation has or should have. And when we looked at what it said for pandemic, because we'd never been through it, we'd never experienced it, didn't have any point of reference for what needed to be done. It was almost like we had to completely rewrite everything that we needed doing. So as the government, was trying to provide advice and guidance about what would be happening, and that was changing reasonably regularly again because this is a situation that no one's been in before. We took a decision to say, what's the worst case scenario that could happen? And the worst case scenario in terms of delivering a service was for it all to be done remotely, everybody working from home. So we made that decision, I think on the 12th of March, and then started planning the week after from the 15th of March. And it's quite a task to migrate all your staff, not just physically working in a different place, i.e. not in the office or not in the external sites that we do, but that you'll be working from home, so you won't see your colleagues very much. And also for the counsellors, because they wouldn't be doing in-person counselling, they'd need to get to understand how you deliver telephone counselling to start with. So that was quite a challenge. Another part of the challenge was we had all the equipment that we needed because all the staff, we had a hot desking policy where people could work on different desks and different workstations when they were available. obviously you can't do that in the current situation. But to get everyone to work from home meant we had to get a laptop and a mobile phone for every member of staff, so that all had to be compliant with GDPR. So all those criteria just to physically get people to work from home and to understand what it would mean to work from home. Then we had to draw up a whole range of policies and procedures because they all changed. All our risk assessments changed, our contracting changed because we weren't doing it in person, so you couldn't ask people to sign a contract. It would have to all be done verbally. So we had to get authorization that a verbal confirmation for a contract was okay. So every little aspect of the processes that we went through had to be looked at and changed. And at the time, I said before, we didn't have a point of reference. So we had to go with what we thought would be the right way of doing something. So we've set all that up in place. We split everyone into working teams, and every team has a team meeting via Zoom once a week, just so we can keep in touch with everyone and they can all see each other regularly. And all those small things about someone having a place of work where they are comfortable with it all needed to be put in place. So that was quite a challenge. We managed to do that in a week. So that from the week of the 15th of March was all that planning. And then we went live the week after, I think the 23rd of March, as a remote delivered service via the telephone. It was slightly easier than if we had no experience of that at all. The Amparo team, who work across the country, have always been based working from home. So we could use those experiences and methods of working to inform us to a degree about how it would work. But of course, Amparo is different than counselling. And that point of difference is quite significant. So we said to start with, it would all be telephone counselling for the adults and for the children and young people. And that proves a problem because lots of the children we work with are 5, 6, 7 years old that maybe have been through a bereavement, or they've witnessed domestic abuse, or they're a child looked after. And having a telephone counselling session with under 11 is really, really challenging. And what we said we would do in that instance is we would work with the parents or the carers or the guardian of that child to inform them of how, in this short term, while we were working out the best process to interact with people, how they could help their child. So we ran that process for a number of weeks, and then we started to train our staff in online and telephone-based counselling so that they were all comfortable in that approach. And then we trialled video platform conference counselling, so the likes of Zoom or FaceTime. We then introduced that on a trial basis, and that really improved the traction rate that we were getting with people engaging with the service. And so as we moved through this whole COVID situation, the vision is to have more of the video support because we're thinking that's what works well. In addition to that, what we're going to be trialling is, particularly with the adults of the children, is to offer them counselling to start with so that they can understand what the process is. And then they can then say to the children, actually, we've tried telephone support, it works really well, and we'll encourage you to do it. So we're always trying to ensure that we can work with all the vulnerable people that have been referred in to us.
It sounds like there's been plenty going on during this period for sure. And also there'll be plenty to get your teeth into over the next few months as well as we adjust to the challenges of the new normal. And it seems as if there are some features of this lockdown period that you're taking as a positive, particularly that sort of remote provision side of things, and may become a permanent way that you, of course, carry out your services. In fact, over the course of the next 12 or so months, what do you think, Richard, is on the horizon for yourself, for Listening Ear, for Amparo, and what do you really hope to achieve as you adjust to this new normal?
Well, what we'd like to see over the next 12 months is increased referrals coming into the organisation. I think when Mr. Johnson, in a speech recently, mentioned the word hibernation, it's almost like there's a feeling that people were hibernating, and now that the lockdown has some of the lockdown rules have been relaxed, people are starting to come out more. Most of the people that we work with have been referred in to us. And I think what was happening is because the people who would normally refer in weren't actually going out to meet people, our referrals did drop slightly. But now that those services are coming back and up and running again, we're starting to see the increase in referrals coming into the system. So what we want to do is just to work with as many people as we can, and providing the best service that we can to those people. And that's always been an ambition of ours. So we've actually started a number of different pieces of work during the lockdown period. We've started up a helpline, a free phone helpline for people who are based in South Yorkshire who've been bereaved during the COVID situation, not necessarily bereaved by COVID. But when we talked to the commissioners in South Yorkshire, they were very clear that, and we were quite in agreement with them, that people who've been bereaved during this period, it's almost like a suicide bereavement, because it's really traumatic. So what we could do is we could apply the methodology of the Amparo service and then transfer that into a helpline. And that's worked really well. So we ran an 8-week pilot to start with, and it's now been recommissioned to the end of the calendar year. So towards the autumn, we'll have another assessment of the impact of that service, and we'll see where that takes us. But what we've already seen is some people with underlying mental health issues who can't access any of the services are accessing the helpline. So that's a fantastic lifeline for them. But we're also finding extremely socially isolated people accessing the helpline, and the feedback we're getting from them is that's their only point of contact with anyone in the whole week. So it's having outcomes that we didn't kind of predict would happen, but a positive outcomes nevertheless. So we've also done it for staff of a local authority, and that's been quite similar, that helpline support. So we're really pleased with the process that we put in place for that to work with people who are really isolated and vulnerable. But we've also extended other contracts of work. So we're extending our domestic abuse work wider, and hopefully our children looked after work will expand as well.
Certainly seems as if there's going to be a need for those services as we exit lockdown, given, of course, the impact that being in lockdown has had on mental health, domestic violence levels, that sort of thing. So I actually think, Richard, given that there are still plenty of things to talk about here, it would be wonderful to perhaps have you back on the show with us in future to discuss where we're at in a few months' time, see how things at Listening Ear and Amparo are getting on, and just assess where we're at as a society at that point.
Yeah, that would be wonderful to let you know what's actually happened, because we were almost sitting there waiting. And someone said to me recently they're expecting a tsunami of referrals, and it's a similar thing that all the services are now set up, ready. We've been working all the way through lockdown, providing support, counselling support. But as you rightly say, once people are starting to come out more, particularly with domestic abuse, we think that will increase rapidly.
There's certainly a great amount of worry about that going forward, and let's hope that we're not going to see a whole new pandemic of such cases as we do exit the lockdown for sure. Richard, I have to say it's been a real pleasure and also an incredibly insightful experience having you join us today to discuss some of these issues. And until we welcome you back on the programme, which I'm sure we will do in future, please do take care and stay safe with all still going on, because there are still a great many variables in this. We don't know whether we will be going into lockdown again after a second spike of cases. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that it is going to be upward trajectory from here.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'd welcome that opportunity.
Likewise, Richard, thank you ever so much again for your time. That was Richard Brown speaking there, Chief Executive of Listening Ear and Amparo. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with England's 1966 FIFA World Cup hero, Sir Geoff Hurst. During his professional career, Sir Geoff scored over 200 league goals for the likes of West Ham United and Stoke City, but most notably, he remains the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in the final of a FIFA World Cup competition after his treble in England's 4-2 win over West West Germany at the old Wembley Stadium 54 long years ago now. I hope that you enjoy listening just as much as Jonathan relished the opportunity to speak with Sir Jeff, and all of that is, of course, coming up next.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Jeff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Jeff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Jeff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Jeff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time, over 50 years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach, as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that, of that calibre, can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life. And that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably. Well, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham, and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved. What a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bobby Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, what I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era I was involved for 6 or 7 years, it was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at the time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in your organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, Jeff, you could perhaps pick right now that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprising they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it only a few games before. I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in a game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, if maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he'd moved one or two players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players and great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course, I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball, and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited to just have a glance round,
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Oh, yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you into. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions that absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was the usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him, so I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic, and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
You've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make us laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest that I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitch people must realise that has an influence, how you react and behave to situations on and off the field. Surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader and at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to. Their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today. Easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson is just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the like of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
Good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody. And going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit, getting on with each other lasted for a long time. And I wouldn't, when you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else. They were all outstanding. And I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was. And I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. But I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Very good nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.